I think there's something in my face. There we go.
What up?
Hello.
Welcome. Episode yada 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 dot dot blah blah blah. Welcome. There you go. There's your intro. That's all you get from me today. Enjoy it. It's the only thing any of you ever get from me again. Anyways, tonight we were talking about some panspermia action going on. Welcome in Steven and Spiderback. The whole team is back for another glorious celebration of shows. We took some time here and there to do whatever we had to do, but now we are back full force. What announcements does anybody have before we begin this peculiar set of episodes?
Just a reminder that we will be going through June. It's almost the end of June now, so we're going through July, and then within the first week of August will be the end of our season. So we'll be taking August off, and then we'll be back again in the fall. So we just have another month's worth of shows to go, and then everyone will have to watch reruns and be sad.
Yeah, maybe we'll get syndicated on ABC or NBC or whatever. See, be fantastic. Making sound adjustments. Steven, how about yourself? What have you been up to?
Just working.
Excellent, excellent. Well, if nobody has anything else, Steven, go ahead and set us off.
All right. So tonight we're talking about panspermia, which is the hypothesis that life exists throughout the universe and is distributed by space dust, meteoroids, asteroids, comets, and planetoids, or potentially through directed panspermia by intelligent civilizations, which is quite the interesting one that is associated with the ancient astronaut theory and the Anunnaki. The concept was, well, actually, before we get into it, do either one of you have anything that you would like to say about panspermia before we start getting into the technical aspects?
I know that there's probably a whole bunch of people in the audience who are going to watch this and hear that word and start giggling like little children.
Yeah.
It, it is kind of a funny sounding word, but it's not what you think it is.
It is not cooking up a well in a greased up oily pan.
And I don't want to get too far into it too fast because I would definitely steal your thunder because this is an area that I'm super interested in with lots of theories and things. So I'm going to wait till we get into the meat of everything before I really start unloading.
Okay.
Because then I'll start doing my usual bulldozer steamroller kind of stuff.
All right. What about you, Rob?
I don't know much about it, so I'm interested in seeing what you bring to the table today.
All right. So, to start off with, the concept was initially coined by the Greek philosopher Anaxagoras in the 5th century BCE. You know me, I love my philosophers over here. And was later expanded by Svante Arrhenius in 1906, who proposed that microscopic spores could travel via solar radiation pressure, which was previously thought of as, like pseudoscience or unheard of. They were like, no, they would die in the extreme temperatures. But modern science examines 3 stages of how this could potentially happen: escape from a planet, transit through space, and landing on a recipient world, with elements on the International Space Station confirming that some microbes can survive low Earth orbit conditions, such as tardigrades, which we'll get into a little bit more later on. So the main mechanisms of transport in the theories are lithopanspermia, which suggests that these extremophiles, or the ones that can survive these extreme temperatures, actually survive inside rocks ejected by impacts, shielded from radiation by the rock's mass. So it's basically a whole bunch of germs that are using asteroids as their own little spaceships to come to Earth or whatever other planet. Now, there is also the idea of radiopanspermia, which suggests that organisms might travel on dust particles propelled by stellar radiation, surviving if enough reach a suitable environment. And then even more recent theories also explore directed panspermia, where advanced civilizations, possibly the Anunnaki, might deliberately seed life using interstellar comets or probes. And I personally thought about that when I was reading this earlier, and I was thinking that does sound like something the Anunnaki could do. And if you were going to try and attempt to seed life on another planet, you would definitely want to use some sort of gene editing technology to make sure that the life was the sort of life that you would want it to be before you tried to create it on this other planet, that where the other planet essentially becomes your petri dish. So, Rob, do you have any questions or any comments before we let Spider get into it?
No, let's go ahead and let my man get into what he got to get into.
All right, go ahead, Spider.
Um, I'll tell you that I really like this theory because it's extremely plausible. And that's not to get into the various ins and outs of whether it's directed on purpose or not, but just the scientific capability of something coming from outside of the system, bringing certain particles, certain compounds, and things that we might not have here. But when you mix with things here, it creates chemical reactions, it creates life. And that kind of thing is really fascinating. And like I said, it's really plausible. It's something that I think potentially happens across the universe in different ways. But as we talked about the last time I was here, which was with the Fermi paradox, it's so far in between that we don't see it so far. Or it doesn't develop life that's on the same level of us or whatever. But that's that's that topic. But I've always been of the mind that things just don't spontaneously happen. It's like the experiments. I think was it Mengele who did the experiments with the meat in the jar. I
Oh, I don't
think
know about that. You'll have to tell us.
um,
I'll look it up real quick then.
spontaneous generation. There was a theory that rotten things and whatever just would spontaneously create flies and whatnot. And so we tested it. I think it was Mengele. It might not have been. Somebody with an M name. I'm pretty sure. He put raw meat in a jar, completely sealed it, airtight, no germs, no nothing. Checked it periodically over and over and over. Did not develop maggots, did not develop flies, nothing grew on it. He set meat in another jar where there were holes poked into it so that things could get in and out. Eventually, it developed maggots and flies, etc., etc. So, the idea that things just spontaneously create, that life just spontaneously happens, that was a good step into showing, well, that's probably not possible. Unless, of course, and I don't want to invalidate the religious aspect of what a lot of people believe, and that a higher form of life came in and spontaneously created life. That's an entirely different argument. And that's, I don't want to invalidate that, but I lean more towards scientifically, you have to have the right ingredients and they have to react the right way.
Yeah.
And whether somebody put them together intelligently or not, you have to have those ingredients.
has
It
to make
doesn't
sense.
just happen. And I think the panspermia theory makes a lot of sense because there's a lot of things out in the universe flying around. We have there's asteroids, there's meteorites, there's comets. Comets have water ice and sometimes other chemical ice. And it's not too hard to imagine something like that landing on a rocky, maybe volcanic planetoid Earth in the distant past, causing a chemical reaction and developing the first single-celled organisms, and then so on and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And then if you do want to, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to tell you real quick before you got too far ahead. I actually did find some brief synopsis of that right here. It said it was actually synthesized by the Greek philosopher Aristotle, which says around 350 BC, suggesting that, as you said, vital heat in non-living materials allowed life to emerge under specific environmental conditions. However, it was experimentally disproven by Francesco Redi, who challenged the theory in 1668 by showing maggots came from fly eggs, not meat. And later, Louis Pasteur's swan neck flax experiment in the 1860s conclusively disproved microbial spontaneous generation, proving contaminants came from airborne particles, according to Wikipedia.
I don't remember why I had it stuck in my head that it was Mengele. He was responsible for a lot of kind of not so great things in our history.
Yeah.
But he also was responsible for some interesting scientific achievements. So I don't want to give him the credit if I don't have to. So that kind of helps.
There we go.
But to get back on the topic here before I wind down here, that panspermia can also sort of satisfy some of the religious ideas in how life is created. While it might not have been spontaneous, it still could dictate that a higher being of some kind directed certain molecules here, either through technology or whatever, to purposely cause the reaction to purposely create life. And I think that's a more plausible, again, personally, answer than somebody just showing up and saying, and I said there was life and here's life. But again, I don't want to invalidate anybody's religions. I'm not trying to step on
Yeah.
anybody's toes. That's just where I'm coming from. But all of that is extremely plausible, and I'm super, super into that. And I'm looking forward to the rest of the conversation here. I think this is a good one.
Yeah. Rob, anything to add?
Oh no, no, go
All
ahead.
right. All right, so as far as the official stories and the official science goes, proponents argue that panspermia provides more time for pre-biological chemical reactions to occur elsewhere and explains how life might spread if it is common in the cosmos. Basically to summarize what Spider just said. Now, the critics note that panspermia merely relocates the origin of life rather than explaining abiogenesis and argue that the harsh conditions of space, such as radiation, vacuum, and temperature, make long distance survival unlikely for most organisms. But then, as we mentioned earlier, you also have to take into account extremophiles and, even other weird things that we haven't even discovered yet because we haven't found the bottoms of our oceans and we're still limited very much in our space travel as far as it goes, like getting our actual human bodies to other planets in a way that they can survive. And there's also a lot of ethical concerns regarding directed panspermia, including the risk of contaminating existing alien ecosystems or extinguishing indigenous life forms. Like if you just start throwing your seeds all over the place, then you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what planets can have that and what planets can't. You don't know, it might be like acid rain to their planet while it's just a slight breeze to us. So that's one interesting thing to think about. Now, as far as the current research and evidence goes, scientists look for biochemical commonalities among life forms. If all life in the solar system shares a genetic code, then it supports a common origin via panspermia. So, like, if we have the same DNA as something on another planet, then that would basically suggest that panspermia was real because, how else would it get there when we don't have the technology to get there as it is today? Now, missions to Mars and the icy moons of Jupiter and Saturn are critical for testing whether life could have transferred between these bodies, and some researchers suggest that molybdenum availability on early Mars rather than Earth may have facilitated life's origins, supporting the idea of interplanetary transfer. Now, I have to ask before I look it up, do either one of you have any idea what molybdenum is?
I have heard the element before because I recognized what you were trying to say through it because it's kind of an awkward spelling. Um, I do admit I've never really looked too deeply into it though, as a particular element.
Okay, I'm looking into it now. It says that it's a chemical element. It has the symbol MO and atomic number 42. It is derived from ancient Greek. We don't care about that. Element was discovered in the sense of differentiating it as a new entity from the mineral salts of other metals in 1778 by Carl Wilhelm Scheele. This metal was first isolated in 1781 by Peter Jacob Helm, and it does not occur naturally as a free metal on Earth. In its minerals, it is found only in oxidized states. So that's why that's probably why it's, relevant because it's not
I've
naturally occurring on Earth.
I've never been great with the periodic table. I know
Yeah.
some of the basic ones, but it was one of those things as a kid in
I
science
had to
class
take
that I could
chemistry
never
twice.
memorize the whole thing. If I have a poster, I can find what I'm looking for, but
Yeah,
I don't have any of that
it
memorized,
was a
unfortunately.
lot.
That was out of my area of memorization
Yeah.
expertise.
Now, do either one of you know anything about extremophiles before we get into those?
I believe it's not as simple as single-celled organisms, but it's something that's like microbial life
Yeah, like
that's
germs.
able to live in places that are super, 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 super hazardous to most other forms of life. They've found them um, at the bottom of volcanoes. They've found them in
Acid.
certain, yeah, acidic pools and various places that you would assume would be hazardous to any form of life, really. And I believe it's theorized that they'd be able to travel through space, hitching a ride on comets or asteroids or etc.
Yep, and that's where the tardigrades come back in here in a minute. Rob, anything you have to add or ask?
Nope, just listening.
All right.
He's the guy in the corner today. He's just listening and absorbing.
Yes,
Yeah.
all I can do.
So, some of the research into lithopanspermia does rely heavily on the resilience of these extremophiles, which, as we said, can survive in extreme, conditions such as 800 degrees plus, degrees Celsius temperatures and like negative 8,000 Celsius, like crazy stuff. We literally don't know how to kill some of these things. Like, even to this day, we do not know how to kill tardigrades. As far as humanity is aware, they are completely invincible. And that's what I think is so awesome about them. And of course, as humans, we got to give everything a cute little nickname for the public, right? We call the public name is water bears because they actually look like little bitty cute adorable teddy bears when you zoom up on them at the microscopic level. It's pretty sweet. So, they're microscopic animals capable of entering a state known as cryptobiosis, which is where they expel nearly all body water and suspend metabolism. So it's kind of like hibernation, almost. And that's another way they're like bears. They're adorable. I love them. Okay. So what we briefly mentioned a minute ago, what Spider was talking about, is known as the landmark TARDIS experiment, and it was conducted in 2007 by the European Space Agency on the Photon-M3 mission. Provided the first definitive proof that complex animals could survive open space. Dried tardigrades. Oh, I got to try the scientific name. Let's do this. Richtersius coronifer and Milnesium tardigratum were exposed to the vacuum of low Earth orbit for 10 days. And not only did they survive, they came back and reproduced while they were in outer space with no protection at all. Not even a spacesuit. They were just like, boop, go up there, outer space. Now, the vacuum and radiation conditions, most specimens survived the combination of space vacuum and cosmic radiation. As far as solar UV, survival dropped significantly when exposed to full spectrum solar ultraviolet light, unfortunately. But a small fraction, including some Milnesium tardigratum, got it that time, still survived, revived upon rehydration. So, like, they literally took these dead creatures, put them in a bowl, put some water, and they're like, hey, we're alive again. Nice. And produced visible offspring. Like, they actually reproduced with no detectable genetic damage in subsequent generations. Their survival is attributed to tardigrade-specific intrinsically disordered proteins known as TDPs that vitrify or turn into glass to protect cellular structures, and the DSUP protein, which shields DNA from radiation damage. And by the way, if you will give me a few seconds, let's go ahead and let Spider talk for a minute. How much did you know about the tardigrades before what we just started talking about here? Did you know
Well, it's a
anything?
relatively in the popular science circles, it's relatively recent as far as time goes. I know the study has been around for a while, but they are kind of a newer thing. So when I first started hearing about them, I did a little bit of research and I thought they were interesting. I think they look like caterpillars to me. I don't think they look like bears at all, but that's just me.
Yeah,
Um,
I can see them definitely looking like caterpillars.
the interesting thing about this is that you can see features like that, certain survivability features in modern life that we have on the planet right now. Frogs, for example, frogs in the wintertime, they, instead of like hibernating or finding like traveling places or going under lakes, they will basically find a spot under the snow or under the ice, and they will lower their body temperature about to zero, lower their heart rate to almost to zero, their blood flow to zero, and basically go into complete suspended animation for the entirety of winter. And then once everything starts to thaw, everything speeds back up and they just start hopping around like nothing ever happened. So they are functionally just about dead throughout all of winter. They don't
Yeah,
do anything, they don't eat, they don't breathe, their blood doesn't pump, but their
and that
bodies somehow make it.
because it
And
pumps it into glass and it like pumps all the water out of their body.
and it's a very similar thing to how tardigrades can just, you dehydrate them, they're functionally dead. You rehydrate them in simple terms, of course, and they're basically alive again. Same thing with a lot of other creatures. You can there were actually stories of certain amphibians that were found in amber that when they cracked the amber open, the amphibians actually survived for a short period of time. But because the oxygen content was different from when they were frozen in, and now and different things, they couldn't last very long. But it's kind of like a starting point for a lot of other forms of life almost.
Like they had some extremophiles that I was listening to in my research earlier today, and it was talking about these extremophiles. Some of them are literally as old as the Earth itself. They're like 400 billion years old. Like it's incredible. And I found what I was looking for. I did some research and I found some potential genes that control some interesting things in genetic mapping, which I wanted to share with everybody. So, how do you know about the axolotl?
Mhm.
The creature that can regenerate its limbs. Well, it has limb and heart regeneration via the stem cell reactivation. The genes that control that are PAX7, TP63, and MSX1. So if we can figure out how to use CRISPR technology to modify those particular genes and inject them or turn them on within the human DNA structure using CRISPR technology, then we could give humans regeneration abilities. Same thing with the Greenland shark, which can live up to 400 or 500 years, controlled by the genes FOXO3 and LMNA. And the immortal jellyfish, which I love to bring up and mention quite frequently. The gene for that one is known as PI3K-AKT-mTOR, and you would look for pathway suppression through JNK and the FOXO genes. And there's an octopus. We all know about the octopus. Its DNA structure is incredibly different from ours, and it would be one of the most dangerous ones to experiment with. But for any scientists out there that are looking into gene structures, I would love to have your help with this. Their genes are the ADAR1 and SLC6A4 and HNRNP genes, and those will allow you to affect the neuroplasticity of your brain, which the reason that I bring these up is because if we can figure out exactly which genes in the tardigrade control their cellular structure that allows them to turn their cells into glass like that, then we could make humans all these things and more through the use of CRISPR technology.
Now, the interesting thing about all this really is, depending on how you're looking at from where we started with panspermia, if you're looking at it as just an accidental asteroid collision or something just dropping off things,
The chances
then
are astronomically low.
sure. But once again, we're talking hypotheticals. We're back
Yeah.
into our hypotheticals. Got to put the T-shirt on. Hey, where's my hypotheticals? But if you look at it first from the angle that it was just basically something that happens at random, then you can kind of understand, okay, this is why certain forms of life have certain quote unquote abilities, I guess we'll call it, versus others. If you're looking at it from a directed point of view, as in another species saying, okay, we're going to direct this here to create these life chains to make these beings eventually, then you also have to get into that, gets kind of into some conspiracy territory, because then you have to wonder, well, why would they make this species without these advantages? Why would they make this species without these advantages? Why would you do this? Why would you do that? And then you get down a whole other rabbit hole.
We have some theories, though.
The beautiful thing about the panspermia theory, however, is that you can almost disregard the fact that it was actually life seeded here, and instead just call it base chemicals that reacted to form life: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, etc. All the various like building blocks on their own can be enough to create life without necessarily being a life giving creature to begin with. Like an asteroid or a comet could come through, not have anything that we would describe as life on it, but it has chemicals. And those chemicals mix with chemicals here, and together that makes life. Whereas they might not separately. So you don't even have to look at it as there's life traveling through the universe. It has to be able to survive to get here. It can just be base elements, which is another fascinating aspect. There's so many ways to look at the theory that are all valid, I think.
It's like
And
when
that's what's great about it. It's just it opens a lot of avenues and a lot of schools of thought, in that you can be a very religious person and it's feasible. You can be an ultra atheistic scientific person and it's feasible. And there's different levels in between.
Yeah. And what you made me think of, sorry to interrupt you a second ago, but what you made me think of was actually like, it's very much like the idea of a flower and the seeds going from one flower to another flower over the wind, except the flowers are planets and the seeds are, panspermia.
Yeah, it'd be more like pollen particularly.
Yeah,
But
pollen.
yeah, basically
That's what I was thinking
that's
of.
the theory. It's just organic chemicals that aren't themselves life or living, but when you mix with the final result, it becomes life. It becomes something that's living, because that's what we are. We're a collection of elements. We're a collection of all these building
Yeah.
blocks. And if we didn't have the building blocks, then we wouldn't be alive. We'd be a rock, or we'd be, well, a piece of wood is technically alive when it's still growing from the tree.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? We wouldn't be something like ourselves without the right mix of these chemicals.
Yeah. So, Rob, what do you think about panspermia? Do you think we might be from other planets, or do you think we might actually have humans living on other planets thinking that there's no other humans on any other planets? What do you think about all this?
So for me, I would have to say that I'm not necessarily a purchaser of the whole panspermia concept. I don't think it's by chance or random, and a lot of it seems to be, like an RNG style situation, right place, right time moment sort of thing. And this is not something I personally believe in, but if people do, that's fine. I can understand the concept and how the concept is mapped out, how the concept is formed. Um, I think too, when people, if we were to go to another planet and see people like us, same genetic structure, same DNA building blocks for the most part, then you would have to start wondering not so much about that theory, but I think the theory that we colonized another world first, say Mars. That planet went to, what? We shot out into the stars and found our own ways and means to procreate. Who knows what you find out there? The universe is such a vast place that I think that in certain pockets and places, the rules of physics don't apply. Who's to say the rules of other things don't apply in these specific locations?
Yeah. And I think you bring up a very valid point, because one thing I've noticed from, looking at it from both sides of the aisle or argument, or however you want to, word it, one thing I've noticed is I personally feel like a lot of religious people, yourself excluded, but a lot of religious people that I've spoken to seem to find the idea of aliens absurd, But as I've seen, from speaking with you and, even some of the way that it's been presented in media recently, as far as the religious aspect of, these things go,
Mm.
I've seen some religious people like yourself recently be more open to the idea of aliens and life on other planets because they say that, it they believe that if there is a loving, kind God out there,
Mm.
then why would he stop at humans? He would get bored of just humans. Why would he make all this stuff for only humans? He would want to make other creatures and, other, for lack of a better words, experiments.
Mm. That's a good point. That's a good point. I don't think things like this should change your faith in any form or fashion, just like the latest Steven Spielberg movie shouldn't have changed your faith in any form or fashion.
Yeah.
Um, but that being said, I think it's plausible that God didn't stop at us. We'll never know that until we respectively go to that next realm to understand and ascertain. But I think God's infinite wisdom is highly possible. Sure.
And with you being a religious person, Rob,
Mhm.
I would like your opinion on some of these, let's say, UFO files that have been released lately.
Mhm.
What do you think about all the stuff comparing them to biblical angels and the UFOs and all that? Do you think it's a psyop or do you think it's real? What do you think about all that?
So nobody really knows what technology we have had or have experimented with in the past. Things like Coral Castle or the pyramids, or any really great modern marvel of civilization that we see now. All comes from somewhere. It all comes from a fragment or a source. As far as aliens being angelic beings or demons, I don't know if I really buy into that theory as much as I think a lot of the UFO stuff is us. Um, we put it out there, hey, we found aliens so that we can slowly desensitize the populace to the technology. Um, so for me, believing how I believe, I don't think aliens are far fetched, but on one instance, I don't think they look like the little gray men and the Nordics and things like that were kind of thrown out there. I think they could be just us. Who
Yeah,
knows? I think it leaves a lot of room open for discussion. It leaves a lot of room open for debate. I think the technological aspect is fantastic because I think it's the government saying this is what we have, but in a way that makes it look like it's alien technology. But I think, in my opinion, that's the case. And whether that's true or not, I don't have all the answers. None of us here
yeah,
have all the answers. So, but that's where I sit with all that. I think a lot of that is us and the government slowly just saying, "Yeah, we have this technology," without coming out and saying we have this technology.
pretty
And
much.
then, when it comes to aliens and things, I don't think it's far fetched. So,
Yeah. Okay, so as far as the mainstream theory about this, panspermia across the galaxy thing, the mainstream theory is that the Anunnaki used ancient gene editing technology to
mm,
seed or perfect life on Earth, and it's a central tenet of the ancient astronaut hypothesis, popularized by author Zachariah Sitchin in his 1976 book, The 12th Planet. This narrative is distinct from scientific panspermia because it is classified as pseudoscience by the mainstream scientific community. However, as we know, a lot of stuff at one time classified as pseudoscience does often, not always, but often does get proven true later on. I mean, gravity used to be considered pseudoscience at one point in time. So, Sitchin claimed that the Anunnaki were extraterrestrials from a hypothetical planet called Nibiru, who arrived on Earth approximately 450,000 years ago to mine gold, which they needed to repair the planet's atmosphere. We all know about that one. And the genetic engineering aspect. Here is the part that really, really reminds me of CRISPR technology. According to Sitchin's interpretation of Sumerian cuneiform tablets, the Anunnaki grew weary of manual labor. They didn't want to do it anymore. They were tired. Their backs hurt, their legs hurt, their knees hurt. So the god Enki, the chief geneticist, and Ninhursag allegedly created Homo sapiens by combining Anunnaki DNA with that of Homo erectus, or a primitive hominid. basically, monkeys, essentially, to create a slave race, the Adamu. Now, when they were perfecting the cells, proponents argued that the sudden leap in human evolution and the specific genetic anomalies in human DNA, such as the missing link in the fossil record or unique genetic markers, are evidence of this deliberate intervention. Because we went from monkeys to people using tools really fast. Now, some modern fringe theories suggest that the Anunnaki didn't just create humans, but seeded Earth with pre engineered microbial life or perfected cells, which they could have created using something similar to CRISPR technology, capable of surviving the transition, effectively a form of directed panspermia. And keep in mind, with CRISPR technology, we can essentially give any human any ability from the entire animal kingdom. And the only problem is it might cause that human to, let's say, not feel so well when they start to mutate. Let's put it that way. YouTube doesn't like that C word, I believe. So we'll put it that way. But if we can figure out how to overcome that, which a lot of, conspiracy theorists believe that they do already have a cure for that, they just don't give it to the commoners. So if they did have a cure for that, then gene editing would basically be no trouble at all. So what do you guys think about that one? Spider, you want to go first?
No, I'm going to preface this by saying that I am a big fan of Sitchin's work. I've read every one of his books, and I own most of them. That being said, a lot of his ideas, while very good and very compelling, are also based a little bit off some translations that aren't quite perfect. I mean, no one, I don't think, can really call themselves an expert in Sumerian language or even the Akkadian language that followed the cuneiform and everything, because so much of that has been lost and it's been so difficult to translate compared to, say, when they found the Rosetta Stone, they were able to translate the hieroglyphs and everything. So a lot of what he's interpreted from what has been found is very, I don't want to call it science fiction per se, but it does kind of border on that, and it's a fantastic story,
Pseudoscience.
and it is very plausible in some aspect. So the thing about it is, though, that there's a lot of ins and outs where it could go different places. And the actual account that he wrote of was that there was a primitive type of people. They weren't simian, but they weren't quite full modern human,
Kinda
but they
like
were
in
somewhere
between.
in the, and I'm not going to say that they were the missing link or something like that, but they were one of the pre-humanoid, pre-modern human, like on the way possibly to us or maybe not. And they took them and they advanced them to be able to do work for them better. And eventually they left because either they'd mined all the gold that they wanted, or part of it had to do was that the disaster was coming. They didn't cause, supposedly according to Sitchin's work, they didn't cause the flood or anything like that, but they knew it was coming.
Yeah.
And one group of them did not want to warn the people because they were tired of them. The other group was like, no, we made them, we're responsible for them, so we got to warn them. And they warned a small amount, and that became the story of Noah,
And the Watchers.
etc. Utnapishtim specifically.
Okay.
But after the flooding, there was too much destruction of what they had already built, and they decided to cut their losses and leave. And some of them said that they would return over time to check on people. There's a lot of scattered stories. Sitchin has a whole series of how Marduk through Babylon and all that other stuff kept on going, and there was still a group here that was doing their thing, and Marduk became the chief deity by beating everybody else into submission and all this other kind of stuff. And it's
That's the best way
fascinating
to do
read.
it.
It is a very fascinating read. but it's one of those things that once you get through the entirety of it, it's very much his theories. It's very
Yep.
much his interpretation of the stories. And while I like him and I would love to see a movie just like that, I'm not going to take it necessarily as scientific fact because we just haven't found, and possibly that's a glaring error on my part, the fact that I'm waiting for some evidence that may never show up because maybe the evidence is destroyed or it's being held from people or something like that. But um I mean, new watchers are going to know that I do that all the time. Chat in the chat there. But I do think it is plausible. Again, I use that word a lot, plausible, because it fits so much that another civilization, if they had an interest in the planet, that they may want to direct the evolution of the creatures here to make their lives better, to make things easier for them. I mean, why bring your whole civilization here and then have to start from scratch when you can say, hey, these things are here and they're not too bright because they don't have intelligence yet. Why don't we just make them do the work for us? We'll just feed them. We'll give them stuff. We'll take care of them sometimes. They'll love us. It'll be great. You know? So again, the base theory is plausible. And again, while I enjoy Sitchin's work very much, it's a very interesting story.
Yeah.
And that's about the beginning and end of it.
I think there's too much. There's too many holes in his theories. There's too much to where he didn't even consider other theories just his own. And I think that's where his downfall was because, like you, I've read them. I have the whole series behind me. I think it opens the door to some interesting concepts and topics that you can kind of pull on. But I think, in a broad sense, you can't really trust. I don't want to say trust. You can't really take his work as science
At
fact,
face value.
just like Von Daniken's, just like the whole ancient astronaut theory, to be quite honest with you. You can't really take it for fact because there's just not enough evidence out there to
Yeah.
prove it. And I think a lot of times what people do is, and it's something that I'm not a fan of, they see like an advancement in human society and they automatically think it's aliens. Oh, they invented something to put in their coffee so that it doesn't taste as coffee-esque. That's got to be the Anunnaki. They gave us that knowledge. No, I think it's human ingenuity. I think that if there's a problem, we'll find a way to solve it, no matter what we have to do. If we have to break laws of physics, if we have to break laws, period, we will find a way to do that. And so, for me, a lot of times, especially with the ancient astronaut theory, it just makes us look like a bunch of goofs. Especially when you realize that in that Anunnaki theory, um, a big part of them wanting to destroy us is because they heard us getting busy, and
Yeah. I love that
they
part.
couldn't sleep to the fact that we were down there getting busy.
Yep.
And for those that don't know what getting busy is, please refer to any '90s R&B song for your definition of getting busy. Um, and so you had that happen, right? So it's a plethora of things that cause all this to take fruition. And I think that gets over. I think the scientific part of this gets overshadowed because you could look at things like the language, like you said. I don't think there's anybody that's an expert on the Sumerian language because we don't know how their dialects acted. We don't know if this person spoke a slightly different version of it than this person did. It's just too old. It's like Akkadian. It's not going to happen. They still have trouble with Latin. So, and Latin's newer than Sumerian and Akkadian. So, I think there's just too much. There's too many holes in a lot of
Yeah.
these theories that don't produce scientific relevancy. They just produce more. I don't want to say pseudoscience,
More
but
questions.
I think at this point you could say pseudoscience for some of this stuff. Some of the more extreme stuff, right? Some of the
Yeah.
more extreme out there stuff. I think you can throw the pseudoscience out there. Not calling everything that you don't understand pseudoscience is a lot different than like our Dyson spheres and things like that. Kind of pseudoscience stuff. We know it's not possible at present. However, we could still dream and see if that happens.
Yeah.
To get back to topic, um, I just think there's too many holes in the theory itself for me to ascribe to it.
Now, I will admit that there are a lot of holes in the theory, and there's even some stuff I think has actually been disproven. But one thing that really stood out about it to me that I thought was very interesting was it felt like to me that it could explain a lot of the origins of like some of the earliest religions on Earth. Like, I've been wondering about that for a while now, and I'm like, like we talked about, a few weeks ago with when we were talking about the Fermi paradox, like, who's to say that aliens didn't just, have this highly advanced technology, or even like you said, advanced, like ancient humans. They don't have to be aliens, they could be humans. I can believe that too, but some sort of ancient people of some sort had this highly, highly advanced technology that the people around them didn't necessarily understand. And so as a result, the higher up people refused to explain it. And over time, they saw how valuable that was, and they got greedy, and they created this whole system to manipulate people into doing what they wanted them to do so that they could maintain power. Like, it started off as a noble thing, and then it got twisted over the years by, let's say, bad apples in the bunch, and now it's very, very complicated because you have like some people that are good, some people that are bad, some that believe, some that don't believe, some that really believe, some that pretend to believe. And it's just a whole wild assortment of, like, it feels like chaos sometimes.
There is a lot of truth to some of that, in that the oldest the oldest parts that eventually became some of our earliest religious thought originated, as far as we know, it could be even older than that, but originated in ancient Samaria. Abraham was a Sumerian. He was a citizen of the city of Ur, and he left the city when it was on the verge of collapse, because it was when the empire was coming down, when the Sumerian people were falling apart and everything like that. And it's mentioned in some biblical translations even that he was a citizen of Ur, but it doesn't necessarily say that he came from Samaria. Um, because by the time that our modern biblical stuff was written, and I say modern from the last like several few hundred years, they had moved on from it being rooted in anything pre what they accepted. And again, I don't want people to think I'm saying that the Bible's fake or anything like that. I'm not trying to step on people's toes once again. I'm just, from a different point of view here. The Sumerian stories, several of them, are nearly identical, except for a few details, to biblical sources, and they're earlier. Like Utnapishtim was Noah, the flood story, very, very, very close, extremely close. The story was retold in the Gilgamesh epic in Babylon, and it was already an old story by that point.
That is exactly what got me started researching into all that. Sorry, not to interrupt.
And you've got, again, the story of the flood itself before then. You've got the story of, Abraham himself, again, he was a living person in that society, and he moved on to be part of a different society that became an entirely different religion. And Abraham is somebody that's accepted across all three of the major modern big religions. He's part of Judaism, he's part of Christianity, and he's part of Islam. They all accept him as a real person, which tells you how important his name was from those earliest sources. So some of the parts in all of those religions have been preserved because they were important and they meant something. And maybe we don't know what the meaning was, because the story is a little different now. The way it's told is different. The morality they're trying to explain to you is different.
Yep.
But there's a little bit of history in all of those. You read the Bible and there's people who completely dismiss it, who are just like, it's just a bunch of religious garbage. It's this, it's that. The Old Testament God was a terrible God and he wanted you to do this, and Leviticus this and all that. But if you look past a lot of that stuff, if you look past the obvious parts that were written by people for the times that they lived in, there is truth scattered throughout the whole thing. There's historical truth somewhere in there. And I'm not even a super religious person, and I still make sure that I look into all that, because history is important regardless of where you find it. And I think eventually, someday, somebody is going to be able to connect these dots in a meaningful way. Will we find all of the answers? No, it's too much time has gone on. It's been thousands and thousands of years. Too many sources have been lost. Too much original things are gone. But I think there is some truth to a lot of that. And then you tie that into, say, Sitchin's work and then the modern stuff that we've been looking at with the theories and everything. And somewhere in there, we can describe the entire history of how we began. And I don't think anybody's going to manage to do it in my lifetime, but I would love to hear a good story about it.
Yeah.
I love to hear people's attempts to stitch it all together, because I've done it. I've got my own version of events in my head from reading all these sources that I think is plausible. I can't prove any of it. I can't say that any of it is any better than anybody else's. But I think it's a good story, and I think it's a good history.
That's the fun of it.
And that's about as good as it can get, to be fair, at least from my opinion.
All right. So I think a good way to close this out tonight would be to go over the actual scientific and academic consensus of what the scholars believe, and then we'll let Rob close us out. So there are some translation disputes, as Spider mentioned a minute ago. The professional, looking at this word on the screen is really, really funny. Assyriologists and linguists universally
They study
reject
ancient Assyria.
reject Sitchin's translations of Sumerian texts, stating he misinterpreted mythological symbols as literal historical and scientific accounts. There is no mention of DNA, genetic engineering, or a planet Nibiru in authentic Sumerian literature. So it sounds basically like a summary of what Spider said.
Yeah.
He made a story out of it, which is a very good story, but it's still his story.
It's very symbolic. And it says there's also a lack of evidence. There's no archaeological or genetic evidence to support the existence of Nibiru or an extraterrestrial contribution to the human genome, no matter how much we would love it, or despite all the very intriguing conspiracy theories going around lately about how Ancestry is working with the CIA to see if there is alien or angelic DNA inside of human beings. The genetic sequencing confirms humans share a common ancestry with other primates on Earth through natural evolutionary processes, and for the panspermia distinction, while scientific panspermia suggests that life could travel naturally between planets, the Anunnaki hypothesis posits intelligent directed seeding. The former is a testable hypothesis regarding microbial life. The latter remains a mythological narrative without empirical support. Because obviously, we can't just go out and test, hey, Anunnaki, did you seed Earth with your life or anything? Because we don't know where they are or if they even exist. So we'll go ahead and let Rob close this out now with any closing statements.
So I think the one thing we should consider is, what if it all just died out?
Yeah.
Couldn't maintain the life. The Earth changed. Humans came.
It evolved, essentially.
I would say, putting all the air pollution out there and things like that. Like I've said before, with the Industrial Revolution and moving the cryptids and creatures back to the fringes of both our imagination and societies, same concept. What if all that life that was supposedly started via that just couldn't make it? And there's multiple ways that life could be started. And that way just didn't cut it as it advanced further on into its journey of evolution, I would say. So something to think about, I think it's something we could think about. But Spider, you got anything left to say before we call it?
Just one final comment, that they are more convinced every day that there is an extra planet at the edge of the solar system. And certain people will say, of course, that that's Nibiru, that's the famous 12th planet.
Pluto.
Who knows? We know Pluto's a planet. We all know Pluto's really a planet.
We don't fall for the propaganda.
But the other
peace for Pluto.
Beyond that, they are more and more certain that there is something out there. And whether it's going to come back around and come in a weird orbit and cross us and drop off some aliens or not, who knows? I guess we'll see.
Excellent.
All right.
I think that we oftentimes want this fantastical origin story, so we throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks. I think that's something. I think it's something we've been doing since the dawn of time. You know, like how were you born? Oh, y'all was born in a cave at the strike of midnight, at the stroke of midnight on Halloween night. The fanatical, fantastical aspect of birth. I think this just adds to it because nobody really knows. We're kind of just here guessing what's going on. So.
Yep.
Well, everyone, that is it for us tonight in Panspermia. We hope you enjoyed the show. As always, we enjoyed having you here. Thanks to our commenters, everybody else that showed up to give a piece of their mind, opinion, or whatever. We appreciate all of our listeners. We invite all of you to follow us on our different channels and different locations. And next week, we'll be back with another beautiful episode of This Uncanny Earth. So, as always, why be boring when you can be uncanny? We will see you folks next week. Peace.